John Constantine, a Hellblazer podcast.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to John Constantine, the Hellblazer podcast. Today we're reading issue 89, and just a little catch up on what's been going on. Currently, John is in Australia after the events of the Eddie Campbell run, where John was unknowingly sent on an evil task to circumnavigate the globe and then do some kind of spell, which would start the apocalypse, or some version of that. And this was all orchestrated by the ghost of Sir Francis Dashwood. But luckily, John was able to figure out his plan, and while he was in Australia, and he figured all that out, he came up with a plan to take Dashwood to the jungles of Papua New Guinea, and he was able to trap Sir Francis Dashwood inside of a tree that hopefully would not be disturbed for a long time. And that's pretty much where we left off, with John still in Australia. So first things first, with issue 89, we got the cover. We see John is standing one-legged on a rock. Now, he's standing in a specific way. This is a Aboriginal way of standing, and I looked this up. It might be wrong. I don't know. It's the internet. But according to what I read, if you stand on your right leg and rest your left foot on the inside of your right knee, that means that you are single. And if you're standing with your left leg down and your right foot resting on the inside of your left knee, then you are married. And apparently this is so if someone sees you from far off, they can tell whether or not it's worth it to walk all the way to see you, or if you're already taken. And John also has with him a long staff. It seems he's kind of leaning on it to balance. And apparently this is also something that Aboriginals will carry around. He is also shirtless, and he has some Aboriginal markings that are painted on his skin. And of course, he's smoking like usual, and he's kind of looking at us like he's badass. And we also see on this cover that this is written by Paul Jenkins with art by Phillips. And this is the beginning of the Paul Jenkins run, which I believe goes for about 40 issues. And as we turn to the first page, we see John, and he is sitting cross-legged in the middle of some kind of Aboriginal ceremony. One of them is playing a didgeridoo, which is a long wooden pipe that when you blow into it with like regulated breaths, it makes kind of like a musical growl. It's a very cool sound. And we can also see that John is looking like he was on the front cover with different kind of Aboriginal paintings on his skin. And some of the other Aboriginal men that are dancing around him have that as well. And over these panels, we have some narration, and it says, "It's 100,000 years ago. I'm sitting on a rock in Australia, listening to the sound of a waterfall. It's like a taste of the first day of the world. Out here in the bush, every day is the first day. They're all connected to one another like a river. That's the secret of Jukurjana, the invisible Dreamtime. Tomorrow is just the dream of today. There's some strong magic in this ritual. I can taste it. The Aborigines cover me with the blood of the dog, protection against the anger of the Rainbow Serpent. Echoes of 1,000 centuries reverberate in the red clay. It feels like cold music crawling all over my skin. The river is slowing down now. Upstream to the past connects the present, flowing towards the future. Me? I'm floundering somewhere in the middle. I'm way over my head." And then John is tapped on the shoulder by the Aboriginal man who's playing the didgeridoo, who is Jeffo, the Aboriginal man from the Eddie Campbell arc. And he says to John, "How are you feeling, mate? You ready?" And John replies, "As I'll ever be, Jeffo. Just a bit freaked out, that's all. Here, this doesn't involve any plant life, does it?" And Jeffo smiles at him, and John says, "Only I haven't touched them since I was 17. Took some iffy shrooms. Next thing I know, me mate Dave Coombs is chasing me around the house with an onion." And Jeffo says, "Don't worry, Jono. You only need this to get into the Dreamtime." And then he holds out the didgeridoo to John. And John takes it, and he looks at the intricate carvings on it, and he says, "Christ, I've seen some of these symbols in Western magic. What's the catch?" And Jeffo replies, "No catch, White. Symbols are the power of the Dreamtime. You blow like I did, do it right, and the snake hear you. She come find you out of Jukurjana. Listen to the sound of the waterfall. That's where the snake is, mate. You play the sound so the waterfall come into you." And then another Aboriginal man next to John says, "When the noises join up, the serpent will be there in the sound. You go sing to her. Tell her to forgive White Man." So John takes a deep breath, and he begins to blow into the didgeridoo. And we can see there's some kind of like a colorful aura that begins to surround John. And his narration says, 2 packs a day play havoc on my lungs. My chest is on fire and I'm getting seriously lightheaded. I listen to the water and I feel it listening to me. My heart's ready to explode. The heartbeat of creative ancestors join in, taking the place of my own, calming it all back down. The sound of the tribe becomes the sound of breathing. Slowly, I watch the magic take shape. My skin adapts to the music and becomes part of the waterfall. It's the first day again, and I'm only a dream. And in the last panel of the page, we can see as John's playing, everything else kind of disappears, and this colorful energy begins to go around him. And there are some human shapes that are also around him, which I think are just the aboriginals in the room. And coming out of the sounding end of the didgeridoo are a bunch of colorful energies. Then we turn the page, and John has completely disappeared from that room, and he is now standing on top of a hill that is next to a meandering river. And when we get an above view of where John's standing, we see the hills and the ground and the topography make up Jeffo's face, and the trees around and the bushes make up his hair. And as John stands there looking around, his narration says, "As I enter the Dreamtime, I remember something Jeffo said when I was back upstream. The tree, he the dream of the seed. I didn't know what it meant at first, but I'm beginning to get the picture. Everything comes from a seed. I've always been a clever bastard, on top of things like, and suddenly everything I think I know gets snatched out from under me. But it's all so sensible and obvious. An idea as old as the hills and still the best. The Aborigines call it Guru Wari, the power of the seed. They say every natural object resonates with the song of its origin. It comes from the rocks and the trees and the animals. And me, I'm just a boil on the bum of creation. The mountain, he's just an echo of the force that created him. Absolutely brilliant, that is. Makes perfect, beautiful sense. Just an echo of the force that created it. Or maybe the people who lived around it. I'm not really here, or maybe I am. I know I shouldn't be. This is black man's territory. I'm just part of the problem. I feel about as welcome as a fart in a spacesuit." And as John is thinking all this, all of a sudden, he's startled by a bird in a tree next to him that begins squawking. And John yells out, "Jesus!" And then behind him, he hears a voice say, "Don't worry about the kookaburra man. He likes to make people jump. Do it all the time to me. You must be a clever fella. You find your way into the Dreamtime." And as John turns to see who's talking, he sees a kangaroo standing in front of him. And I should also mention that the bird and the kangaroo have some kind of pink energy around them. So John isn't actually startled by hearing a kangaroo talk to him because he knows he's in the Dreamtime. So he looks at the kangaroo and says, "Got some help from Jeffo's mob. Listen, I'd love to stay and chat, but I have to find the Rainbow Serpent." And the kangaroo says, "You come to sing to Snake? I was wrong, Whitey. You crazy fella." And John replies, "No arguments there, Tosh. Just tell us where the snake is, huh?" And the kangaroo says, "White man don't learn. You hear song, but never listen." And John replies, "Try me." So the kangaroo jumps over to the river's edge, and John follows it, and the kangaroo says, "River, she watching you. You speak to her, she listen to you. Yak in there, take you to the snake. Careful, man. You piss her off, she bite hard." Then as John looks at the river and then looks back at the kangaroo, he asks, "What, in there?" But then he sees that the kangaroo is gone, and all that's left is like the wisp of its energy. And John says, "Oh, for fuck's sake." And then John's narration says, "Typical. Gone like the wind. It's a good trick, but it's really starting to get on my tits." So John jumps in the river, and it seems right away that this is not a shallow river and that it goes down pretty deep because he's able to fully submerge himself. So as he jumps in, the narration says, "Long as I keep my head straight, I'll be okay. I just have to remember I'm not really here. Or maybe I am. Whichever's true. I'd give me left nut to be home in bed. But I can't, can I? Got something to do. Once more into the breach and all that. The fate of the Western world hanging by its nads from a daisy. There's always some daft twat who will take the plunge at a moment's notice." And as John looks around under the water, he sees a big black shape sweep across his vision, but it's dark so he can't quite make it out. And his narration continues saying, "Nothing to worry about. It's all a dream. I'm sitting on a rock in the middle of Australia. I'm not really here." But as he thinks this, the dark shape comes into view and he can see what it is, and his eyes are wide like he's seeing something scary, and almost like a wish to his previous thought of him not being really here, his narration says, "God, I fucking hope not." Then we turn the page and we see what he's staring at, and it's a gigantic eel-like snake that has very, very sharp teeth and is staring right at him under the water. And John is standing on the riverbed, and I also forgot to mention that he's been carrying a boomerang. So as this snake is staring at him, he kind of looks like he's brandishing the boomerang, like he's going to use it against this snake to protect himself. And also the snake has a rainbow aura coming off of its body. We also see on this page that the name of this issue is Dreamtime. Then we turn the page and we cut to the past, where John and Delvine, the woman who sailed to Papua New Guinea with John, are sailing in the rain back to Australia. And John's narration says, "It's 2 days ago. I'm standing on the front of Delvine's boat. I've just chased a mad ghost and a murderous cat halfway around the world. Delvine's throwing a wobbly. Situation normal. I'm playing the Shining White Knight, pretending to take it in my stride. It's all part of my cunning plan. I can tell she's got the wind up, even though she's trying not to show it. Now seems like the ideal time to explore the path to her inner fears, by way of her knickers." So as they approach the docks in Australia, Delvine says to John, "I'm telling you, I don't bloody believe it, John. Dead abos I can handle. Ghosts? Fine. Even the flying bloody circus back there. But rain? At this time of the year?" And John kind of jokes and says, "Sorry, love. It's me, isn't it? Sometimes I swear I'm a sodden rain magnet." And she says, "Yeah? Well, you can fuck off home. Never a truer word was spoken." Then John sits down and lights a cigarette, and he says, "Don't blame me, you strappy cow. Serves you right for all them cracks about me suntan. Seriously, though, about what did happen." But she cuts him off, saying, "Enough said, kiddo. The more I think about it, the less real it seems. Hey, after we put in, you fancy a beer?" And John looks up at her and smiles and says, "All right, love. As long as you've got something besides that horrible gnat's piss you lot drink." And Delvine answers, "I was hoping you," but she stops herself as she sees something past John that surprises her, and she says, "Bloody oath, look at that, would you?" And when John turns to see what she's staring at, we see Jeffo is standing on the dock, and he's standing in the Aboriginal stance with his right leg down and his left leg up, and he's kind of resting on his staff. And Delvine says, "It's that crazy abo out of Crowsville. What's he up to then?" And Jeffo calls to John, "Hurry up, mate. We got trouble." So John tosses the rope to Jeffo, and Jeffo catches it and ties their boat to the dock. And John says, "Leave it out, Jeffo. I'm knackered. Chasing about spirits might be easy for you lot, but it's harder for simple buggers like me. What'd you do with the cat, by the way?" And Jeffo answers, "Skinned it." And John laughs and says, "Not bad for a primate." And Jeffo shoots back in jest, "Yeah? Well, too dangerous for a simple bugger." And as they're talking, we see Delvine is beginning to unload supplies, and she has a box that has a bunch of cigarettes in it. And as she steps onto the dock and looks at John, she says, "Hold on a minute. You're not seriously going off with this madman, are you? I thought we might, you know." And then John reaches out and he says, "Sorry, love. Duty calls. Listen, can I nick a couple of packs for the road?" Ta. Then before she can answer, he just reaches out and grabs a couple packs of cigarettes. Then he just walks away from her, leaving her standing in the rain holding the box. So as John follows Jeffo onto the shore, he says to him, "This better be good, sunshine. She was about to flash me the old upright grin." And Jeffo turns back to him and replies, "That not all you get from Delvine, mate." And John says, "Ha bloody ha. So what do you need me for, you clever bastard?" And Jeffo turns back around and begins walking again and says, "Don't need you at all, White. Maybe you need us, eh?" And John seems to be lagging behind, and I think it's because he's carrying a big duffel bag. So Jeffo turns to him and says, "Come on, mate. Won't need that bag out here." And as John adjusted to his other shoulder, he says, "I'll take me chances." But then when John looks up, he sees Jeffo is gone, and he says, "Oh, don't bloody start." But I guess Jeffo is just messing with him because John does eventually catch up with him. And as they walk across the landscape, John's narration says, "We're further downstream now, nearing the end of the first day. Tonight will be the dream of tomorrow. Tomorrow's another first day. Jeffo's a cagey little fucker. I get the feeling he knows what's occurring, but he won't let on. He's testing me. I feel like England trying to qualify for the World Cup. Absolutely sodden clueless." Then we cut to a little while later, and John is sitting and resting. Of course, resting means smoking a cigarette. And John says to Jeffo, "Well, fuck this for a game of soldiers, Jeffo. Suppose you tell me what's going on, eh? Because as fun as it is, I'm well past me fun limit." And Jeffo isn't sitting down. He's actually walking away, and he says, "Soon, mate. Come on." And as he walks into an area with some bushes, John takes a drag of his cigarette and says, "Dream on, Tonto. I'm fucking shagged. You go on ahead. Kimosabi smoke fag here. And Jeffo replies, sun going to sleep. Be cold when it gets dark. And John sarcastically replies, fair enough. But Jeffo gets kind of annoyed at this and he turns around and says, now you acting like white man again. Set your mouth on fire and wonder why your dream go up in smoke. All the tucker you need right here in the bush. Open your eyes, mate. Might learn something. And he kind of waves his staff at the bushes as if he wants John to look at them. And there's a panel of just the bushes, and we can see there is some kind of aura and energy coming off of them. And Jeffo says, there, see? Witchetty grub crawling in the grass. Over there, tree offer his best leaf to the caterpillar. Over other side of mountain, I can hear wombat sleep in his hole. He dreaming about us. All them part of the same thing. That bush tucker, see? And I had to look up what tucker meant because Jeffo said it a couple times and I wasn't sure in the context what it meant. So apparently it's just another word for food. So he's saying here, see, that bush is food. But everything's kind of tied together by these energies. So the grub is crawling on the grass and the tree is offering his leaf to the caterpillar and the wombat is dreaming about us. But John looks up at Jeffo and says, I don't know, mate. I've seen a lot of different people with different ideas on the subject. You're just one of many. But Jeffo replies, not just a belief, mate. This the way it is. And John sarcastically says, that's what they all say. Then Jeffo kneels down in front of John and says, you wrong, Jono. Knew when I saw you up in Crowsville. Saw it in your eyes. You different from other white men. You live in the Dreamtime. And then Jeffo points at the bushes with his staff and he says, tell you something. Mr. Dingo, he behind that bush over there. I see him, not with my eyes. He Chukrajana. Means he there, but not really there. When he come from behind the bush, he's still there, but now I can see him. And John is kind of disregarding what Jeffo says, and he looks at the bush and says, I'll take your word for it, mate. I can't see a sodden, but then he pauses as all of a sudden he starts to see the energy coming off of the bush and the dingo behind the bush. And he exclaims, Christ almighty, Jeffo, is that it? It's like some other kind of light or something. Bugger me backwards. And Jeffo replies, I knew you see Chukrajana, mate. It remind you of something? And John replies, yeah, my brain in the 70s. And he's saying that because it kind of looks like everything's got a psychedelic glow on it. And Jeffo says, all that acid stuff, that's when Whitey tried to open his eyes. He take one step into the Dreamtime and shit himself with fear. He decided to close his eyes again. His mind soon follow. Then he turns to John with a big smile and says, now you taken the first step into the Dreamtime, Jono. Don't lose it, mate. Pretty soon, you'll be able to see what I see. And as he says this, the background behind him kind of floods with psychedelic colors, showing us that it's not just like a little aura coming off of the bushes that he sees. To him, the world is just an acid painting of auras. And with that, now that John kind of sees what Jeffo is talking about, they begin to walk again. And over them walking, John's narration says, I'm not far upstream now. The first day has begun all over again, and I've been given my first glimpse of the Dreamtime. It exists in the animals, trees, and every space in between. Subtle, concentric energy fields linking everything together, fusing all the days into one. Then as they're walking, they come upon a dry riverbed, and it seems like this area is very desolate. And John's narration continues saying, but for some reason, I can't feel it here at all. Jeffo's told me nothing yet. Now that I can see the Dreamtime, he says, I'll be able to work it out for myself. I'm beginning to see the root of the problem. White man. And as they approach the dry riverbed, we see there is a kangaroo who is dead and has just had his face removed. I'm assuming this is some sort of trophy killing. And Jeffo points at the body of the kangaroo and he says, there, mate. You see? You see what happened to the Dreamtime? And John replies, I see it. The ignorant fucking bastards. Then we see another animal walking in the dry riverbed. And it looks like it's a skinned dog, maybe a dingo, but it definitely looks in pain, and it looks like it's probably going to die soon. And John's narration says, it's clear as day. Not content with smegging up his own backyard, white man brings his spiritual cancer into paradise. We've taken hold of the great dream, twisted it by the bollocks, and turned it into a nightmare. So Jeffo walks over to the dog, and he stabs it in the heart with the pointy end of his staff to put it out of its misery, and he says, this feed down into our river. Why'd he do this on purpose, mate? He think if we live in his shit, maybe we go away. Then he just move in and do it over again. We been here since the time before time began. We share the dream with creative ancestors, same then as now. Dreaming everywhere, real strong then. Every morning, Gugor Gaga Bird laugh loudly to wake us up. We remember that today is the same as first day, and go on and do our stuff. The Rainbow Serpent, she happy to sit and watch. Then white man come, like ants. He kill us and beat us, and say we the savages. Feel sorry for him. He think he own the land. Make the plants and animals into slaves with his farm. His eyes tight shut. He can't see. Ears blocked up from listening too hard. Rainbow Serpent, she start wondering. Nowadays, Whitey think he clever, but he still cut up the ground and burn everything. He may be planting tree, but he lose sight of the seed. See the tree, he the dream of the seed. Rainbow Serpent, she angry now, but she wait because Whitey's fence keep him in. And as Jeffo was saying all this, we see a couple panels that describe what he's talking about. So in the first panel, we see a bunch of animals that are thriving and living. Then in the second panel, we see a white man and woman, and they are in like Victorian clothing, and they have old style Victorian handcuffs with them. And then in the third panel, we see factories with big smokestacks pouring pollution into the air. So John walks over to Jeffo, and he helps toss the dog's body into an area where I guess the river is still flowing, but I believe the water is polluted from like the factories that Jeffo is talking about. And as he does this, John says, "Listen, Jeffo, it's all a bit much in one go. What do you expect me to do? Christ, back in England, I couldn't even dent the system. How do you expect me to save you from the white man?" And Jeffo replies, "We don't need you to save us, mate. White man does. There's big trouble coming. The serpent, she tell the birds to take a message across the Dreamtime. She see white man not content to take some land. He leave his little fence and head out into the bush. He want it all. So she tell us it best to go Chukurjana. We try to make her understand, but she don't care. The animals, they agree with her. Now you up shit creek. They going, all of them." And John is kind of confused by this, and he says, "Hold on a minute. You mean all the animals have scarpered off inland somewhere to die?" And Jeffo answers, "No, mate. They're going back into the Dreamtime." And then he brings up his finger to his mouth and he says, "Shh, you hear that?" And John answers, "What? I can't hear a bloody thing." And Jeffo replies, "Yeah, exactly." So this is just illustrating what he's saying, that all the animals are leaving this area and going into the Dreamtime. So John and Jeffo continue to walk, and they're following the river back to its source. And they eventually get to a very large cliff that has two waterfalls coming down it, and there's a very large rainbow at the bottom where the mist is settling. So John looks up at the waterfall, and he kind of puts two and two together with what Jeffo was saying and why John has been brought here. And his narration says, "And that's the point, isn't it? That's why he's brought me here. It's the last outpost of heaven on earth, and I have to find a way to save it. Not from white man, mind. For him." So as they look at the waterfall and the river below it, Jeffo points to the river and says, "Don't go too near river, mate. That where serpent live. She don't like people come too close. She make edge wear away. The Rainbow Serpent, she's so powerful here, you can see her even when she chukurjaka." And as Jeffo is talking about this, he's pointing at the rainbow that's formed in the mist, and that is supposed to be the actual representation of the Rainbow Serpent. And he continues saying, "She live here since before we climb out of the mud. Sacred place, mate. It not changed since the first day, until Whitey come along. In the international interest, they say. So they sell land to some French company." And John asks, "What for?" And Jeffo answers, "Uranium mine, same as everywhere else. My mob live here on a good deal. We look after river, she look after us. Even our tribe not sure about white man now. They not sure if he worth the trouble. They look at him just like they looking at you right now, with suspicion." And John is kind of startled to hear that there's more than him and Jeffo there. And he says, "What? Where?" And then he turns around and he sees a whole group of Aborigines standing behind him. And this is a group of young males being led by one older male. And there's even a young boy with the older male who's kind of sticking close to him. And as John sees this, he says, "Fuck me, it's the cavalry." So John tries to say hi to the older man and he says, "Hello, mate. I'm John Constantine. Came here with Jeffo, see?" But the old man just ignores him. And I think just to show how much disdain he has for John, he actually begins to pick his nose. And at this, John says, "You, don't speak our lingo, eh, mate? Right. Not a problem. I don't speak yours either. And as the old man pulls out his finger from his nose, John sees a booger at the end of it and kind of jokingly says, "What'd you find then? A gold watch?" But still ignoring John, the old man eats it, and John is disgusted by this, and he says, "Ah, lovely." And then he turns back where Jeffo should be, and he's not there, so he calls out, "Jeffo!" And then he runs a little ways away, and he finds Jeffo looking down a dirt road where a car is approaching. And as John runs up to him, he says, "Thanks, pal. Remind me to leave you stranded on the East End sometime." And Jeffo says to him, "Quiet, mate. Looks like more trouble." And we see as the car approaches, it has written on the side of it, Office of Aboriginal Land Commissioner, Acquisitions Department. And there's 3 people in the car. There's an older white woman and 3 younger white men. And 2 of them have semi-automatic rifles. So as they drive up, John's narration says, "Stands to reason. Maybe I can only glimpse the Dreamtime, but I'm well handy when it comes to attracting the local wankers club. Quite clearly, this has the makings of a rollicking good time." So as the white people park and get out of the car, the old woman pulls out a gun and approaches Jeffo, and she says, "Mr. Napi Jimpa, I have one word to say to you. Wednesday." And she has a clipboard and she looks down at it and says, "On Wednesday last, Mr. Napi Jimpa, the Governor General's office issued a written judgment granting ownership of this territory to Tryon International under Section 17 of the Hyatt Act. Matrifilial concerns notwithstanding, the law cannot recognize your claim of punitive conception place relevant to the judicial determination of contemporary land claims. In short, you and your mob are trespassing." Then she raises the gun and pushes the barrel into Jeffo's arm. And John is very angered by this, and he looks at her very sourly in his narration says, "That's it. I've heard enough of this shit to know it stinks. Jeffo might be unwilling to put up a fight, but this is more my game. And right now, nothing would give me greater pleasure than handing this snotty old bag the large one." And she continues saying, "Really, Mr. Nampi Jampa, our offer for compensation of your land is quite fair." And John has heard enough of this. So John walks in between Jeffo and the lady, and he actually puts his pointer finger in the tip of the barrel of the handgun. And then he cuts her off saying, "Said Christopher Columbus," as he lined up his crosshairs on Big Chief Sitting Duck. "Why don't you throw some beads in while you're at it, you old vicious wank stain?" And the old woman doesn't really seem fazed by this. She just looks down at her clipboard and says, "No one told me there was a palm here. Who are you, Greenpeace? You don't strike me as the type." But John cuts her off again saying, "Nah, just someone who can't stand stuck-up wankers like you. I'll bet you even get out of the bath to take a piss." And she looks up at John with disdain and says, "Do you know how loud a rifle shot is, Palm? Not enough to be heard back in Crowsville. Now get out of my shit." And just in case you didn't catch her from the context, Palm is slang for someone from Britain. So the woman moves past John and over to Jeffo again, and she hands him a piece of paper from the clipboard, and she says, "Here, the law requires me to allow you 2 weeks to vacate the area. That's a copy of the court order and a transcript of the ruling if you can read it. You've waived your right to an appeal, Mr. Napi Jimpa. Ignorance of the law is no defense." And Jeffo takes the paper and he actually tears it up in front of her face and he says, "You don't understand, missus. Land don't belong to us. We belong to the land." And then he hands the torn pages back to her and John laughs saying, "Ha, wicked." But she gets very angry at this and she raises her gun again and says, "How dare you, you bloody throwback?" And then she calls to one of the men with the rifles and says, "Jiffy, fire over their heads." And Jiffy kind of reluctantly says, "Right, Miss Grinshaw." And as he raises his rifle to shoot it into the air, John pats him on the back and says, "I wouldn't do it if I were you, sunshine." And then he points over to Jeffo, who has a devilish smile on his face, and he's holding a knife now. And John continues saying, "They get hungry when they're pissed off, know what I mean?" And Jiffy looks pretty terrified at the idea of being eaten alive. And of course, John and the Aborigines are just using the white men's prejudice against them because they obviously don't eat people. And Miss Grinshaw, who's still angry, says, "Time-wasting tactics, that's all. I can return with 100 men if necessary, and I will. Be assured, I love a good fight." And then the older Aborigine man walks in between her and Jeffo, but he doesn't say anything. He just stands tall, quietly, with his staff in front of him. And she looks at him with contempt and says, You listen to me, jubbly jubbly. Me come from boss man office, big city, big company come here. Metal stuff you no likey. Fish swim up river. Boss man give you big money. You go live up river. Nice place. "You old man, speak for tribe, eh, chucker?" And the old man looks at her with a dead stare and says, "Yeah, fuck off, jubbly jubbly." And he says that last part kind of sarcastically, mimicking the way that she was insulting the way that they speak. So Miss Grinshaw gets in her car with her men, and they begin to back away, and she yells out the window, "2 weeks, Mr. Nappy Jimpa. I'll be back to make sure you've left." And then John puts his hand on the car and says, "If you're still alive by then, you old manky trollop." And then the young Aborigine boy runs up, and he bends over and he shows his ass to her, and he says, "Hey, missus, you stinky vagina." And then the white people drive away. Then we cut back to later that night, I'm assuming, where this issue began, where John is in the middle of this ceremony and he's blowing into the didgeridoo and he's entering into the Dreamtime. And like I said at the beginning, he is surrounded by psychedelic colors now. And as he cycles his breathing into this didgeridoo, his narration says, "I'm all the way back downstream, and now I can see the connection. I'm standing in the front of Delvine's boat. I'm looking into the eyes of a dead kangaroo. I'm here by the river, watching the dance, in the grasp of the yak-yak. The snake feels the ripples and slips in to investigate. I'm sitting on a rock in Australia, listening to the sound of a waterfall. I'm being born all over again. I'm just an echo of the forces that created me. The echoes are part of the song. I'm blowing into a didgeridoo. I'm Juker Jana. I'm standing in the Dreamtime." And we see John once again is just staring at the river that meanders kind of like a snake's body. And he's looking at it from the top of a hill that, when viewed from above, looks like Jeffo's face. And John's narration continues saying, "I'm not really here. The tree, he just dreamt of the seed. Everything comes from a seed. I'm not really here." And then John remembers Jeffo saying, "You different from other white men. You live in the Dreamtime." And then John's narration says, "I'm not really here." And then his eyes snap open and he's staring into the face of a kangaroo who is staring back at him. And his narration continues saying, "Symbols are the power of the Dreamtime. I'm not really here." And then he opens his eyes again like he was in a second dream. And now he's back underwater and he's staring at the Rainbow Serpent. And as his eyes snap open, his narration continues saying, "Yes, I am. I'm inside the great dream and it's cold." Then the Rainbow Serpent moves forward and snaps down its jaws on John's left leg. And John's narration says, "My ankle's being ripped out of its socket. The pain is real enough. The yak-yak's grip is strong enough to crush my leg completely. I know she wants to. She hates me." And John tries to reach for his leg in her mouth to try to free it, but she begins to swim forward and the pressure of the water moves him backwards. So now he's just being dragged along by his leg. And his narration says, "That's a warning, just to let me know. If the serpent doesn't like my song, the journey back will end at the bottom of the river. Back in the circle, I'm still blowing on the didgeridoo. My lungs have almost collapsed. That's why I feel like I'm drowning." Then the Rainbow Serpent swims upward and jumps out of the water and throws John out of its mouth and onto the surrounding banks. And John begins coughing up water, and his narration says, "I don't have to guess where I am. I can hear the sound of the waterfall above. This is where the serpent lives. I've come as an emissary of the white man, seeking an audience with the force that created us. I'm a white man in black man's territory." And as John finishes coughing the water out of his lungs, he looks over and he sees the body of a coiled snake in the shadows. And it is gigantic. Now, I'm not sure if this is the same river snake that he was being dragged by, because it definitely has a more desert snake body, but it is rainbow colored like the water snake was. So this might be just another representation of it, but on land now. So as John looks up at it, his narration says, "And now it's time to state my case." And the snake looks down at John and says, "Sing to me, John Constantine." And that, my friends, is the end of the issue. So if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planes, trains, and comic books, all one word, at gmail.com. And we will see you on the next one.